You're listening to Nutrition Matters Podcast with Paige Smathers, registered dietitian nutritionist. Hey everyone, it's Paige, your favorite nutrition podcaster and dietitian. Nutrition Matters Podcast explores what really matters in nutrition and health with a sensitive and realistic approach. This podcast relies on the support of listeners like you and needs donations to keep this project running. To help support the podcast, please consider making a donation at pagesmothersrd.com/podcast. If you find this episode interesting, engaging, or helpful in your life, please consider donating, sharing with friends and family, and leaving a review on iTunes. You can leave a review about this podcast straight from your podcast app. Search Nutrition Matters Podcast, click Reviews, and then write a review. You can also find me on Instagram and Facebook at Paige Smathers RD if you'd like to have a little more food for thought. Thank you for listening. Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of Nutrition Matters Podcast. My name is Paige Smathers and I'm your host. And as always, I'm really excited to share this conversation with you today. Today, I'm sharing my conversation with Melissa Carmona, who is a mental health professional and a counselor therapist in North Carolina. And what makes Melissa's story unique and interesting and helpful to all of us to listen to is the fact that Melissa was born and raised in Colombia. And then I'll let her tell you her story. But at age 16, she moved to the United States. So she has a unique perspective on some cultural differences between the two countries in terms of how that affected her relationship with food and her body, how that relates and affects her current work that she does with her clients. She's especially passionate about creating a space for Spanish-speaking individuals to be able to access support and help and resources for struggles with mental health, including body image struggles and struggling with food as well. So before we get into that, let's just briefly remind you about some of the resources that are available to you. Go ahead and if you haven't already, hop onto Facebook and join the Nutrition Matters podcast community there, where we talk a little bit more in depth about some of the episodes and where you can meet other like-minded people just like you. And also, if you like what you hear on the podcast and you'd like to be able to take things a little bit further, but you're not sure exactly how to do that, a resource that you might want to check out is my online course. You can find more information at pagesmothersrd.com/course. And this is an online course, 10 weeks long, that really walks you through how to become an intuitive eater and how to unlock that inner wisdom that all of us have with our relationship with food. And it helps you walk away from chronic dieting for good and also find a really comfortable space with trusting your body and also incorporating principles of nutrition science and gentle principles of nutrition and balance. So check out that online course, see if it might be a good fit for you. Again, where you can find more information is at pagesmothersrd.com/course. And you can also read up about other people who have taken the course and learn more about their experience with it. So with that, let's get into talking to Melissa all about her experience of kind of living in two different worlds and her own struggle with food and body image in that experience and in kind of navigating two different cultures, both as a younger person and continuing on today with her current work. Thanks so much for tuning in and enjoy the conversation. All right, Melissa, welcome to Nutrition Matters Podcast. Thanks so much for being here.
Hi, Paige. Thank you so much for having me.
And for anyone listening to this recording, we are attempting this a second time. So if we ever refer back to our last conversation during today's conversation, you'll know that that's just because we're in round 2 here today, trying to make sure that the audio works and that everything goes smoothly. So anyway, Melissa, I invited you to come on the podcast because I know that you have a story that's unique in terms of your own experience and then also where you've landed professionally and culturally as well. So I wanted to invite you on to talk about your story of your journey with your own relationship with food in your body. So does that sound like a plan?
Yes, it does.
Okay, awesome. So start kind of from the beginning and talk about what food and your conception of body image was like growing up, and then I'll kind of prompt you along the way with more questions.
Yeah, definitely. And even before I say anything, I mean, I would like to start out by just saying that my culture is a big part of my identity. Whether we're talking about the sense of community that comes with the Hispanic culture, or Spanish language, or food, and values such as like feminism and respect. These are all very important to me, which means that they heavily influence the way that I look at the world, meaning food, body image, weight, mental health even, and even how the world affects me too. And it's also important for me to let people know that this is my story, my experience. So this might not apply to absolutely everyone in Colombia or where I'm from, the Hispanic culture, or even my own family. But body image, our relationship with food, and mental health are all topics that apply to everybody, no matter where you come from or what language you speak. So it's important for me to hear that's my story, and hopefully, if anything, at least gain some awareness from that. And
Melissa, that's a great kind of introduction. And what we did last time in our last recording that ended up not working out for us is I asked you at the end to talk about, kind of summarize what you talked about, but to do that in Spanish. Mm-hmm. And so I was wondering if you might be willing to give that same sort of introduction in Spanish, because I'm thinking, if anyone's listening who speaks Spanish and who Spanish is their native language, I personally think that hearing words in your native language has just such a different effect on how it hits home for you, and that you're able to understand more nuance and meaning from your native language. So if you would just take a little minute to talk about what you just barely said, but just kind of in Spanish, for anyone listening who speaks Spanish, I just think that might be something that might be meaningful to them.
Yeah, definitely. Para los que estén escuchando en este momento, esta es la historia de mi vida hasta el día de hoy. Mi experiencia, la experiencia que he tenido en dos culturas diferentes, sean la cultura hispana o la cultura norteamericana. Vamos a tener una conversación sobre la comida, sobre nuestros cuerpos y sobre la salud mental, y lo importante la gran influencia que tiene nuestra cultura cuando se trata de estos temas. Es muy importante para mí que las personas sepan que esta es mi historia, mi experiencia. Puede que no se vea lo mismo para cada persona, pero igual es muy importante para personas que estén escuchando este audio que la cultura es importante. La cultura es una gran influencia en nuestras vidas.
Perfect. Thanks, Melissa. Okay, so with that, let's start into hearing about your childhood and the way you internalized messages about bodies and food growing up in Colombia.
Yes. So I grew up again in Colombia, South America, and I didn't move to the U.S. until I was 16. And so a great part of everything that I know comes from Colombia, comes from the Hispanic culture, from my family. Everybody in my family is from Colombia, pretty much. And so growing up, like everywhere else, we strive for thinness. And but over time, I started getting mixed messages. So in Colombia, there's this heavy influence of beauty pageants. So from the beauty pageants, we get this expectation of having to look curvy, but also thin. So like this curvy yet thin expectation overall. Also growing up, there again, the expectation that thinner is healthier was a big message that I received. Whether it be from my family, doctors, anybody in the healthcare kind of system, I received those messages. The other thing that was really big for me was how important the messages that I was receiving from my family. So I talked to my mom about this. I talked to her a lot about this topic, actually, about body weight and body image and mental health. And fortunately, she gave me permission to talk about her story a little bit here, too, because it's so important. I do believe that the majority of the messages that I got was about my body come from home. Because she struggled with her weight or wanting to look a certain way her whole life. And so I never heard from my mom. My mom never told me, Melissa, you need to lose weight. Melissa, you have to look a certain way. But that's what I heard herself telling herself every single day. And so I remember going to doctor's appointments with her and her constantly being told that she needed to lose weight, even though looking back, my mom has never had like high blood pressure, cholesterol, or diabetes, or anything like that. The doctors, it was just the first thing that they saw and the first thing that they told her that she needed to do, that she needed to, in quotes, take care of the way her body looked. And they would send her to nutritionists or dietitians, and that was my first exposure to nutritionists and dietitians. And what was that? It was a person that would always give my mom a list of meals and show her literally a spoon and how much rice or beans she needed to be putting in her plate. And so these are like specific memories that I have growing up in terms of that relationship with food. And so there was always this sense of happiness every time she lost a couple of pounds. But then, as we know, because diets don't work, in the end, she would always end up gaining the weight back and even more. And so just growing up around that frustration and almost fixation and having to lose weight, I started to absorb those messages and believe them myself. And so I constantly found myself from a very young age questioning what I was eating, skipping meals, comparing my body to those around me. And this is still going back to this message that as a country with beauty pageants, that we constantly, all of us, would compare ourselves to. Just talking to my mom the other day and how, I don't know if people know what quinceañeras are, but in the Hispanic culture, it's really important. It's like the celebration of becoming a woman at 15. And there's this party ceremony involved with it, and to the point where we are so concerned on the way that we look that plastic surgeries have become a priority almost for 15-year-olds, that they're asking to have plastic surgeries, to have the bigger boobs, to have the bigger butt and the thinner waist. And so that just kind of gives you an example of how big of an issue this has become over time. The other thing that was very important for me, just looking back, was the economy in Colombia. It is a poor country, and at least compared to the U.S. And so growing up with a sense of insecurity in terms of food, when I came here to the U.S., it was like this whole new world for me. I did not grow up extremely poor, but we did have a lot of limitations on what we could buy or what we should buy. So simple things like cereal, simple things like peanut butter, these things are way more expensive for whatever reason in Colombia. And so we had to prioritize, okay, what are we able to buy this week or today? Are we able to, what's going to fill us up more? And what are those things? Rice. We eat rice almost every single day. We eat a lot of beans. We eat a lot of breads, stuff like that. And it's also part of our culture. It's part of what we eat in general. As a Colombian culture, it's just what we eat. And it's what we enjoy in terms of flavors, textures, all those things. But it was also a sense of what will make us full and what would last longer too. And so moving forward a couple of years, moving here to the US at age 16, where you have access to all these things, Um, Peanut butter and candy. I remember just going crazy on all that stuff because it was like this sense of like, I don't know when will be the next time
Well,
I
when
will.
you're raised in a home and in a space and in an environment where you kind of didn't feel like there was, or you kind of wondered, okay, will I be able to eat this food again? When those foods were around, you probably did kind of need to almost, you feel the need to kind of go crazy on them. And then, yeah, in the US, it's probably a lot different. And so, but you're kind of trained to kind of think, oh, this food is scarce, so I need to get as
Yeah,
much as possible. You
exactly.
know,
Yeah.
a lot of people who struggle with food insecurity in their childhood for whatever reason they have that food insecurity will a lot of times struggle in adulthood with remembering and knowing that food is not scarce because it can get so ingrained in who you are to kind of see food in that way. And when you're around it to kind of feel like you need to kind of almost get really compulsive around it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and for whatever reason that didn't make sense to me back then. I remember even like my aunts and uncles would send us like gifts back to Colombia every now and then, and with that it was always like candy or yeah, certain like Reese's cups and Snickers and stuff that we don't have in Colombia and stuff that was not a necessity for us, so we never bought it. And I remember every time I would get like these bags of candy, it would be gone in a matter of like a day or two. And just looking back at how exactly what you said, this was like this fear of like, I don't know when is the next time I'm going to be able to have access to this.
So can
Um,
I just want to cut in really quick and just
yeah,
help people listening understand that it doesn't really matter if it's a true food scarcity issue like you had growing up or if it's a food scarcity issue that you bring on yourself, right? That you tell yourself you can't have these foods. You still will have similar response whether it's a true like food insecure situation or a diet that you put yourself on. Your body, your physiology, your brain, your psychology will all have the same response to that scarcity, whether it's, you know, real or perceived in the brain. So that's just something to kind of think about. It's very easy to recognize that in you and in your story, but I think some people listening who maybe have never gone through food insecurity, I just want to connect what you're saying to their own perhaps story of maybe dieting and recognize, wow, that still does a similar thing where you feel like you have to just eat it all and eat it all quickly because you don't know when you'll get it next time. So it's an interesting parallel.
yeah, no, and it makes a lot of sense. Just looking back in terms of the economy in Colombia, um, when I moved here to the US, um, it was like I had so much more access to other foods and food in general, whether it be because I was able to start working and I had more money, whether it be because we were able to receive food stamps. That was something amazing that we don't have access in Colombia. And so having that sort of restriction have to food, whether we're talking about just because of financial issues that families are going through, or because you are putting yourself, I mean, through a diet, restricting yourself, not allowing yourself to have something, I feel like the reaction is going to be the same. It's like your body is going to go almost in survival mode. And
Well, it's
panic through.
something you need to do to stay alive. And so it makes perfect sense that your body would have innate mechanisms to force you to do the things that you need to do to stay alive. Kind of like, you know, if you're just not sleeping, ignoring the cue to go to sleep, eventually you'll pass out. If you're ignoring the cue to pee, eventually you'll pee your pants. If you ignore the cue to eat, eventually you will find food because you will be so motivated to figure out how to feed yourself. That's all you'll be able to think about. And it's just fascinating to consider the fact that it's no different if your brain perceives a threat of scarcity or if there is true scarcity, it's still the same response. So,
Yeah.
okay, so you grew up in a place, what I'm hearing so far is you grew up in a place that really emphasized looks, and it was kind of this, this standard of beauty that hardly anybody can live up to, and the curvy but thin look was kind of what was in Colombia. Meanwhile, there was some issues where when you moved to the United States from a food perspective, it just was is a very different food environment. And so there was some kind of adjusting not only maybe to cultural differences, of course, but also food differences and different expectations. I'm assuming you're going to talk about different expectations of beauty and things along those lines. So pick back up where you left off and kind of keep going with your story.
Yeah, so moving here to the U.S., I moved here when I was 16. It was overwhelming. So I had the messages that I had received back home in Colombia about how my body was supposed to look. And so receiving the messages of just one culture in itself is exhausting. But then when I came here to the U.S., I started getting even more messages on how I was supposed to look. It went from I should have these curves to you should look thinner, to the way that your skin tone is supposed to look like, to the language that I was supposed to talk. And then even still thinking about body image. Lately, it's been like, okay, so curves are in again, but you still have to be thin. So it's like a mixture of these messages that I've gotten since 16. And my poor body was trying to keep up so hard, whether it be because I was putting myself through these diets, or whether because, looking myself in the mirror, it was like I hated my body and the way it looked.
Can I ask, culturally, was it kind of taboo to have those struggles with your body? Were those expected? Were those okay? Or was that kind of really extra shameful? Or give an idea of kind of where that stands in your own family culture.
It's a weird thing because it's almost like something that everybody's doing, but no one talks about. So in Colombia, sometimes I feel like it's the same here too, but in Colombia, I would constantly get these comments, whether we're talking about just random people, family, friends, of it didn't matter where you fell in the spectrum of thin or fat. There was always a comment being made. So if you were too thin, oh, well,
eat up.
Yeah, you got to eat. And especially because food is such a big part of our culture, right? So it was always a comment of like, well, if you're thin, you need to eat. Or if you were gaining weight, oh, you gotta be careful about that. What are you doing about that to take care of it? So I did receive a lot of those messages growing up. But
and
again,
do you get the sense that there could have been a shape of your body that would have led to zero comments? Does that make sense? Like, could you have ever pleased people?
No.
Looking back? Yeah.
No. Because when I lived in Colombia, I mean, as a child, looking back at my pictures, I was like very thin. And I came to the U.S. and I gained some pounds. And when I went back to visit, so back then when I was very thin, I still heard a lot of the, oh, you need to eat a little bit and get some hips in there. But when I went back and I had gained somewhat, it wasn't like a great amount or anything. I just had gained, at 16, going through.
Yeah.
Exactly. Anyways, my body was changing, and then I would get the messages of like, oh, you gained some weight, and we need to make sure that doesn't get out of control, whatever that means.
So did that lead to insecurity, and did you change some of the ways that you were eating, or what happened after some of those visits where you got those comments?
It definitely increased my insecurities even more. So you start having this idea of how your body's supposed to look like, and then you start getting these comments and you become even more fixated on them. what started happening was while I was here in the US, I started restricting. And I started, the way that I ate changed a lot in general. And so it's something that's important for me to mention is that food in the Hispanic culture is such an important part of our culture. It's so much more than fuel. We cook as a way to show love to people. We cook in a way to welcome people into our lives. I try to cook Colombian food as much as I can as a way to remember home and my family here in the U.S.
Yeah, because food is such a way we connect to all of those things, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it is like it is the beautiful connection between each other, to ourselves, to our past, to our childhood, to our cultures, to other cultures that aren't our own, but that we appreciate and love. Like I kind of get annoyed when people say that food is fuel. It's kind of like, well, sure, but there's so much more to it. And I think it sounds like, everybody I talk to from, South America and from the Latino culture, they really tend to understand that and get that a lot more than some others. So I admire that.
Yes, and so food was always an important link between me and the culture and who I am. And so when I started dieting here in the U.S., not only did it feel like it was, not only had I already moved away from my family, because my parents are still in Colombia, my sister was still in Colombia, I had some aunts and uncle, but I have a lot of family in Colombia. So not only had I moved away from my family, but food in my body became such a big part of that acculturation process here in the U.S. That it was almost like I lost a piece of myself, or even more, right? So I was already missing my family. I was already struggling with the language. I was struggling trying to fit in. And now I was giving up food, culturally speaking.
That must have been so hard. What was it like socially for you? I know this might not have a bunch to do with nutrition and body image, but I'm just curious, what was it like to come to a brand new culture? Which state did you move to?
North Carolina.
North Carolina. So talk about what that was like for you, just from a human perspective. I just am fascinated to hear that must have been difficult.
It was very isolating, that's for sure. I remember that first year, I was so angry. I was so angry because I missed my family. I missed my friends. I missed that sense of community. I mean, Colombia, it has more of that collectivistic culture, that sense of community. And the U.S. is a lot more individualistic. So you're very much aiming towards your goals and going somewhere. But in Colombia, it was so different. It was always about family and friends and your neighbors and all that. So it was very isolating. Not only because of that, but also there was the language barrier.
So you came not really speaking English.
I spoke some English.
Okay.
But I was very insecure.
Right. It's hard to talk with your peers when you feel like you have an accent or they might not be able to understand you. I'm sure that's like really intimidating.
Oh gosh, yeah, intimidating. That's the word. That's for sure.
It must have been really
hard. And so it was really hard. It was really hard. I am already a very shy person, and so I'm sure that didn't help. So I was angry, I was shy, and I was depressed too.
And then meanwhile, you're battling this, trying to navigate a new food environment, plus all these different expectations about bodies and your own insecurities with your own body, trying to mesh two cultures together. That just sounds like a perfect storm for some teenage angst. Yes. To put it lightly.
Yes. And something that's really important for me to also talk about today is that the stigma that there is around mental health in general. So I was going through a period of depression. Yeah. And so, especially coming from my culture, I've gotten a lot more exposure to mental health topics here in the U.S. And so growing up in a Hispanic culture, there's this huge stigma when it comes to any kind of mental illness, whether we're talking about anxiety, depression, or anything else. There's this sense that you should just shake it off, and reaching out for help to a psychologist, a therapist, a counselor, or even your doctor is just for crazy people. Locos is what we call it in Spanish. And so not only was I feeling isolated, but I felt like I shouldn't be talking about these things. I shouldn't be talking about my disordered eating. I shouldn't be talking about my sadness or my anxiety of being in this new country. Yeah, it was isolating. It was lonely. And then a part of me truly believed that I shouldn't be reaching out for help.
So, and I know we're going to kind of fast forward here, and I don't mean to chronologically, but you are you a social worker, or are you a clinical mental health counselor? What's your...
Yeah, clinical mental health counselor.
Okay, so these days you work in a therapeutic setting, and you do a lot of work with various people from lots of different backgrounds, but one of your passions is in helping people, Spanish-speaking people, to have access to therapy and care and in their native language. So with that being said, with your current training, your profession, your current, work and passions in life, why is it problematic and dangerous to just say like, oh, I don't really want to reach out for help. That's only for this type of person. That's not me. Like what's wrong with that type of thinking? What's your critique of that aspect of maybe what's culturally normal in Colombia and many other places, including the United States? I mean, there's a lot of that here too. So talk about that.
Yeah. Oh gosh. I mean, Colombia and here in the US too, I've learned, but more in Colombia because of that big stigma. It's like so uncomfortable for whatever reason to talk about our mental health. So there's this belief, let me just kind of focus in Colombia, because I feel like a lot of these messages, you get them here too.
Yeah, feel free to focus there, and people can kind of draw their own parallels. That's fine.
Yeah. And so there's, again, this stigma of if you need help in terms of your mental health, that you're crazy. And that's not the case. If you're feeling depressed, you just need to shake it off. Or if you're feeling anxious, you just need to stop thinking. Those were literal quotes that I got from doctors in Colombia, or I didn't get. My mom struggled with depression for a really long time in Colombia. And the lack of knowledge that there was back then, it's amazing to me. So my mom struggled with depression for months, and we didn't know what depression was. The doctors didn't know what was going on with her. And the only thing that they could say to her was, you need to stop thinking. I cannot make this up. That was literally something that a doctor told my mom. You just need to stop thinking. And that was it. I mean, to the point where it got really severe. And so that was my first exposure to mental illness at a very young age. And so you're taught, because of the ignorance, unfortunately, that your mental health is not as important as anything else. They focused for years on her weight, and you should lose weight and what that means or was supposed to mean. But they couldn't for a second ask her questions like, do you cry easily every day? Do you struggle with your thoughts? Are you sleeping? Are you eating? Right? It was always like the concern was, the focus was always on something else.
And I'm sure that wasn't with bad intentions. I'm sure that's more culturally informed rather than, rather than neglect or something intentional. But that makes that doesn't, the thing is that just you need to talk about it, right? You need a safe place to process through all of the difficulties of life.
Yes. And there's this sense of comparing yourself to others, like constantly, whether we're talking about body image or we're talking about mental health in general. There's this sense of like, well, I'm not as bad as that person, so maybe I shouldn't worry about it. And I think that all comes with the lack of knowledge too. So whether we're talking about disordered eating versus eating disorders, people think that because you don't look a certain way that maybe you shouldn't worry so much about it, or that it'll get better if you just kind of work on it on your own. So it's a lot of myths that need to be brought down, and whether we're talking about, again, eating, food, body image, or in general mental health. And I think that a lot of it comes from the lack of awareness, and I think a lot of it comes from us not talking about it. Doesn't matter where what country we're talking about at this moment. And so in Colombia, again, there's this sense of like, no, you just need to shake it off, or not that this is, I don't know how to say this without offending anybody, but Catholicism is a big part of the Hispanic culture. And so there was this sense of like, you just need to pray it off. And it's a lot more than just that. If a person is getting to the point where they're so depressed that they're having suicidal thoughts, it's a lot more than just praying it off. Many
people, can find peace in their own path with spirituality, but it's also maybe something in conjunction with perhaps other treatments as well, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that that's a great piece when it comes to treatment and recovery. But just like someone would take diabetes or cancer as very, very seriously, go look for treatment and ask for several opinions, I do believe that people should also reach out for help if they're feeling depressed or if they're struggling with anxiety. There's this, a lot of times they separate your physical health with your mental health, when in reality they're both as important and affect one another.
Right, they do. They play into each other in a positive way or in a negative way. Mm-hmm. So Melissa, tell me about how you went from that space that we were just kind of illustrating, and all of those struggles that you were going through in so many different ways. How did you put the pieces back together and get to the point where you are, where you're about to be a new mom, which is so exciting. Yeah. And probably by the time this is released, you might have even had your baby. Yeah. So that's so fun. And you're working actively in the space of helping people work through their own issues that you've struggled with yourself. How did you turn that around? What are some steps or some epiphany moments or anything you can point to that helped you kind of navigate that really difficult path?
Yes. I wish I could just pinpoint one moment where I was just like, it clicked. Oh man, but I feel like it was so many things. I think it was the part about body image and food. I think it was a matter of exposure. I think it was a matter of learning more and not just following everything that I read on a magazine or heard on TV or was told by someone. I think a lot of that came with exposure, whether it be I learned about health at every size. I learned more about my culture. So I was able to get more in touch with my culture and realize how important food was in my life, and how important it was for me to talk to my mom. I started talking more to my mom about her relationship with food and how it affected her. I started asking more questions. I asked for help. I feel like counseling was great for me, and kind of being able to put all these things together. Hearing other people's stories definitely was an important piece for me. And not only that, but yes, pregnancy has been an interesting journey for me, and I'm sure it can be a whole different other conversation, but just realizing the amazing things that my body can do, and it's not related to my weight in any way. Realizing that I can be loved, that my worth is not defined by the number on the scale. All those things together were essential to bring me where I'm at today.
Yeah, and sometimes the best way to learn things is when you're teaching others. Don't you think you have to kind of like learn it on a different level when you're supposed to be the one that people are coming to for help? And sometimes it helps to kind of put the pieces back together when something comes out of your mouth to help another person, that then you're like, wow, that's so true. I need to do that better in my own life, or I need to realize that for myself. Yeah, and the truth is we're all learning these things. We're all going through our own processes with, or is it processes? I don't know what the word is. Anyway, with our food and with our bodies, and some days are better than others. And yeah, I love that you said, I wish I could point to one moment, but it wasn't like that. I think that's really the true sort of normal experience for people, is that it's just little experiences that add up where you take a minute to look at them and you say, wow, I'm okay. And I'm a good person, and I'm more than a body. That's part of who I am, but that's not everything. And figuring that out and using your body for good, whether that's your work or being a mom, growing a baby inside of it. I mean, that's amazing. If you just contemplate that for 2 minutes, your brain will explode. It's so amazing what your body's capable of. And I think that those experiences in life are such a gift, and it's our job to take a minute to just notice them and reflect on them, because we all have them almost every day, where we can take a minute to just reflect on, what is my body doing for me? What is working really well? What have I learned? What progress have I made from today from a month ago? If we took a little time to give ourselves some credit, I think we'd see a lot of that.
Yes, and I think, oh man, yeah. I mean, and that's what I tell a lot of people. It's not a matter of it's just going to click and I'm going to wake up tomorrow and all of these messages that I received throughout my life are going to be gone. No, they're still there. I think that it's a journey for sure. It's something that we work on every single day. And something that you said just about movement in general, I think that was a big part of that too. Switching that focus from how my body's supposed to look to what my body can do was a big piece in that recovery for me. I'm not a person that goes to the gym. I'm just not, and that's completely fine. But being able to, I really enjoy being outdoors, going hiking, and just realizing, oh man, that my body's able to bring me all the way up the top of this mountain. Exactly, pregnancy. Just, you learn about this in school, right? Biology. But then for whatever reason, it doesn't click until just now. It hasn't clicked to me, at least.
No,
just now.
Once it starts happening to you, yeah, it's different.
Exactly.
Talk about that. Talk about pregnancy. I think that this is a really unique opportunity we have to have someone on my podcast who's like looking at motherhood, right? You're just like almost truly going to be immersed in like absolute 24/7 crying baby, like every emotion going on all at once type of life. And I want to hear about what's going on in your head about pregnancy and your body, and what are you reflecting on, and what's making sense to you in terms of this whole spiritual experience of growing a human inside of you.
Oh gosh, I wish I could put it into words. It's so hard to describe, but like throughout the whole pregnancy, your body goes through so many different changes. And the one, it's so many things. First of all, you're creating a life. And it's like, it's mind blowing. It's so funny. And my husband will make fun of me because every now and then I'll get into these really intense conversations of like, oh my God, my body's creating a life. And he's like, yeah, I think we've known that for a couple of years. But just the thought of that is mind blowing. The thought of the way your body creates space for this tiny human is amazing to me.
That's a really cool thought. Elaborate on that. Tell me what you mean by create space. I love that.
So creating space, I mean, your body literally expands, your skin literally stretches out to be able to give this little person space, and for it to grow. And just thinking back at when we're talking about body image, for example, stretch marks, we're told, oh my God, you need to apply all these things to avoid it. You need to, again, you're told, you can't gain a lot of weight. And I'm like, I'm literally pregnant. Stop it. So even during pregnancy, you still get a lot of those messages of like the way that you look or you're supposed to look, and these
but
conversations.
don't you get compliments like, wow, like you're glowing? Like, I mean, that's like the classic thing to say to a pregnant
Yes.
lady. But for me, I got a lot of really rude comments like, wow, you look like you're going to burst. And I'm only 5 months pregnant or something. Yeah. But then I also had things on the other side of the spectrum that were like the nicest things anyone's ever said to me. Like, you just look so at peace and so lovely and so motherly and so beautiful. And I was like, wow, where have these compliments been my whole life? It was kind of nice to hear people give true compliments about what you're radiating as your essence, rather than like what your, pant size is or something stupid.
Exactly. And it's so funny because we're talking about body image and weight and all that stuff. And it's like, you get the two opposite sides of like, it's almost like you get a break from them because you're pregnant, right? So it's like you're still getting these messages even while you're pregnant. So whether it be someone trying to compliment me and tell me, oh, but you don't look that pregnant, or you didn't gain that much weight, I know there's like a good intent behind that, but just even thinking about that, the messages that we get during pregnancy. So a certain way that you're supposed to look, like you're not supposed to gain too much weight, don't exceed in terms of food, because yes, all that good stuff. But then being able to take a step back and actually look at myself in the mirror and realize what's going on with my body, what's going on inside of my body with this little human inside of me. And I think that a couple years ago, I would have seen the stretch marks. I would have looked at the number on the scale and I would have flipped out. But being able to take a step back today and realize this is my body creating a human life. This is my poor skin stretching out as much as I can so she can grow. That's amazing to me today.
I think it's such a great opportunity to realize that, like, it doesn't really matter what your body looks like. You are doing so many incredible things with it, and you don't really know what's going to happen to your body afterwards. Like, you really, like, there's all these unknowns of like, okay, I probably will never have the exact same body I did before pregnancy. How could I? My rib cage expanded, my hips expanded, my belly expanded, like everything created space for this human. How could I ever expect myself to be, anywhere close to the same? And that's okay. And learning how to love yourself with a different look to your body, with a different shape to your face, with different sized arms and with different sized clothes. I just think it's such an amazing opportunity we have during pregnancy to really see the beauty in something different, and in the fact that really what our bodies are for. Like, truly, from like an evolutionary perspective, that's exactly like the purpose of our bodies. And to know that you're doing that, and to be able to kind of be at peace with whatever happens to your body, I think is a really kind of a really big step in the journey of body positivity. And you know what? You don't need to be pregnant or be a mom or even be a female to be able to experience this. I think seeing this even in other women around us and recognizing the beauty in a pregnant woman who might be like at her wit's end with stretch marks and with, feeling tired and feeling huge, like these things are hard during a pregnancy, but to be able to see beauty, whether that's yourself or someone else, I think is a really important lesson to internalize, to say, gosh, like, then why am I stressing out so much about me, Because when I look at you, I see this incredibly beautiful mother to be, and I wouldn't have you any other way, But it's just sad to think about how many women beat themselves up, during their lives, and men during their lives, but also during pregnancy. I don't know if I'm making any sense or if I'm just rambling, but
no, yeah, I mean,
these are interesting thoughts to me.
It's like, because of the messages that we've received throughout our life, and I think this is across cultures at this point. We're taught for so long that those things don't matter as much. We're taught that we're supposed to weigh a certain number depending on our height, and that's the end of the story. And it's not. So pregnancy is just one of the many things that our bodies are capable of doing. And so, again, it's like these things, and that's probably why I was so mind blown in these whole 9 months, because it was something that I never really sat down and thought about. I hate it took me this long to be able to get to this place, but I'm hoping that with what I've learned, the exposure that I've had, that maybe I can pass along a different message, whether it be to my own child or to other people around me.
Right. I think that's another opportunity that pregnancy brings, is the opportunity to reflect on just that. What do I want my legacy to be? And I want to be sensitive to anyone listening who maybe desperately wants to be pregnant and or has had some type of loss in their life. That's definitely not trying to have this conversation to make anything that you've gone through any harder. But I really believe no matter who you are and what situation you're in, these types of things can be reflected on whether you happen to be pregnant or not, whether you happen to be female or not. I just think that you do have some unique opportunities to kind of be in a different mindset during pregnancy, and it's fun to hear what you're thinking about and what's going on in your mind these days, because that's it's a big transition and a big it's such a miracle. And I think it's not crazy that you periodically have these moments where you're like, a life is inside of me. That's crazy. Yeah, it's so incredible to just ponder that, and it's such a beautiful thing. I'm so excited for you.
Thank you.
So talk a little bit about what you do these days for work, and what your focus is with your practice.
Yeah, so I currently I'm a clinical mental health counselor. I currently work at a private practice. It's called 3 Words Counseling here in Greensboro, North Carolina, where I provide group and individual counseling in both English and Spanish. My hope is to help people heal their relationship with food and their bodies through a health at every size and intuitive eating philosophy. So no diet talks coming from my end. I also do a lot of work with trauma, depression, and anxiety. That, as we know, all of them can become intertwined. I'm also trying my best to spread awareness on these philosophies in both English and Spanish, one social media post at a time. There's not many resources out there for Spanish speakers when it comes to mental health. So that's one of my biggest goals, to be able to put the word out there, to be able to let people know, Spanish speakers, people, everybody in general, but obviously as a Spanish speaker myself, to be able to put those resources out there, or at least provide some sort of exposure to these topics.
Right, because to help people know that they're not alone if they're struggling with body image, or if their relationship with food is really chaotic and they feel like it's something they can't talk about, being able to see someone who speaks Spanish in their native language, perhaps, say, hey, me too, or hey, here's this resource, or hey, read this book, I think is essential.
Yes, and I think especially coming from a Spanish-speaking community, there's so little awareness of what kind of help you can get, of just what mental health is. I've asked people, how are they doing in terms of their mental health? And they just look at me with a blank look. So being able to know that they can ask for help if they're feeling sad, if they're feeling overwhelmed, that they can ask for help from their doctors, from nutritionists, from counselors, that there's many, many ways for them to get help. That's really important for me, because I know from a personal experience that I didn't know, my mom didn't know, some of my aunts didn't know what was going on in terms of their mental health and the kind of treatment that they could get. So my goal is to be able to put the word out there, let them know first of all, it's okay for you to ask for help. It doesn't matter where you fall on the spectrum. You can ask for help, and we are out here to help you.
Yeah, there's such a need for more people to not only do similar work to what you're doing, but also more Spanish-speaking people to get into becoming therapists and becoming dietitians and becoming doctors and psychiatrists and psychologists. Like this, I really think that it's so important to be able to access resource and help in your native language. I mean, I have had sessions with people who aren't native English speakers, and it's so hard to convey the nuance and to understand each other in a way that can really produce positive change in someone's life. And I admire the work you're doing, because it's so important. And I think if there's one thing that I've benefited from with social media and with the internet, it has been a sense of community where you don't feel like you have community maybe in person. There's been various ways that that's shown itself to me and been really helpful to me. And so I know that sometimes it feels like, okay, yeah, one social media post at a time. Yeah. But I can't tell you how meaningful that is to know that you're not alone. That sentiment alone is a really important thing for people. So it's great.
Yes. And there's two things that I wanted to say about that. So the first one, obviously, I mean, just today, social media has become such a big part of our lives that I do believe it's one of the many ways that we can reach out to people. But there was something that you said about like providers, and that we need Spanish-speaking providers. We do. I think that that's really important. And on the other side, it's also really important, even if the providers don't know any Spanish, just becoming a little bit more aware about other cultures. And
of course.
How health, whether we're talking mental or physical, can look so different from culture to culture. And so asking providers, whether we're talking about doctors or dietitians, if you do not understand something that's part of the culture of the patient or the client, ask questions. It's so important to ask questions. Patients are going to appreciate that more from providers than if the providers just assume something.
Yeah. Questions is such like an important mantra to have in the back of your mind as you're speaking with someone, whoever it is, but especially someone who you might not totally understand right off the bat. So questions, hey, how do you want to talk about this? Or when you say that, what do you mean? Or, those kinds of things can really help to facilitate trust and really can help you do your job better as the provider, but then also help them feel more at ease with your recommendations and your help. Yeah.
Yes, definitely. Like allowing, I think a big piece in the Spanish-speaking community is this sense of respect. I'm not sure if respect is the word that I'm looking for, but for any kind of authority, and doctors and providers are part of that. We look up to these people, and sometimes we don't question these things. So anything that they say. And so if the question comes from the provider, what are your thoughts? How are you feeling? Or even, more importantly, asking them too about their mental health, it allows the space. It lets them know that it's okay. It's okay for you to talk about these things, that these things are also important. And not only that, also like Fat phobia in the medical field is a real thing too. So being aware of these biases is going to be very important in terms of body image.
Right. In terms of the provider being more aware of their own bias, but then also the patient being aware of the fact that there likely is some inherent biases. You know, some of them might even be unintentionally racist too, right? I mean, unintentionally prejudiced. And these are all things that I think we're really trying to work through as a society, hopefully actively trying to work through it. But I think acknowledging that some of that might be there on both ends and trying to work together to really see people for who they are, ask questions, and really trying to refrain from judgments that aren't helpful.
Yes.
On both ends.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay, this has been so important. I love your story because I think we need to shed light on how different cultures can clash and how people can experience such similar struggles in such different ways, and how I don't know, I just want people listening to know that they're not alone. And it's really, I think when we hear another person's story, we can't help but feel connected to that person and hopefully more likely to ask more questions, more likely to reach out and get to know people in our communities and feel like we have so many things that bring us together and that bond us and so many similar experiences. And so this podcast has featured a lot of people who a lot of them have just been people who have said, "Hey, Paige, I'd love to come on your podcast." And, a lot of people are from very similar type backgrounds. And I loved your story because it's, you grew up in Colombia, and that's such a different experience than a lot of people have had who have come on the podcast in the past. And so it's a unique perspective on such a similar and familiar issue that so many of us can understand. But I appreciate you being willing to share that today, and really excited for all the things coming up in your life, motherhood, and excited to keep in touch with you on social media and see all that you're doing to help people feel like there's a place for them to get help and resources. So thank you again for being here, and just take a quick minute and talk about how people can keep in touch with you.
Yes, so online at threebirdscounseling.com, they can find me there, but also on Facebook, I'm there as Melissa Carmona, LPCA, and I'll provide you those links just in case. It's hard for people to spell my name sometimes, so I can provide those to you. And the other thing, Paige, I was wondering if it was okay for me to kind of finish it too in Spanish.
Yes, we wanted to do that. Please do.
Yeah.
So summarize whatever you'd like to say in Spanish would be lovely.
Okay. Entonces, a todos aquellos que están escuchando en este momento y están lidiando con cualquier cosa que les esté causando preocupaciones, inseguridad, miedo, ansiedad, depresión, quiero que sepan que no tienen que sufrir solos. Yo personalmente sé lo difícil que puede ser pedir ayuda. Especialmente porque estamos tan acostumbrados a escuchar cosas como la terapia es para locos o solo deja de pensar, cuando en realidad no es tan sencillo. Problemas de la salud mental deben ser tomados tan serios como cualquier otra enfermedad, y así como iríamos a un doctor cuando no nos estamos sintiendo bien físicamente, también podemos pedir ayuda cuando nos sentimos decaídos, tristes o fuera de control. También es importante para mí recordarles que estamos en un mundo donde somos juzgados por la forma en que nos vemos físicamente, sea delgados, gordos, altos, bajos, blancos o negros, cuando en realidad esto no es problema de nadie más que nosotros mismos. Nosotros somos dignos de respeto y amor, sin importar ninguno de estos factores, y a veces la persona más importante de recordarle esto es a nosotros mismos. Entonces, tomes este momento para dar un paso hacia atrás y pensar cómo me siento, cómo se siente mi cuerpo en este momento, necesito ayuda. Y si la respuesta es sí para esta última pregunta, llámenos, busquen un profesional, sea doctor o terapista. Lo importante es que no sufran solos, porque no es necesario, estamos aquí para ayudar.
Thank you, Melissa.
No, thank you.
It's such a beautiful language. I love it. And thank you for all the work that you're doing to help so many people. It's so important to the work you're doing. And so I'm excited to follow you professionally and also to hopefully get a little peek at your new baby when she comes.
Yes.
And good luck in these next few weeks waiting for her. I know that can be kind of hard. But thanks again for being here.
Thank you so much, Paige. I really, really appreciate the work that you do in general. I think that some of the stuff that I learned a couple of years ago, I would have never imagined. You're a registered dietitian, right?
Yeah.
Or yes, registered dietitians. The work that you actually do. Sadly, the exposure that I had way back when wasn't the best one that I could have. So it makes me really happy to know that we have people like you out there helping others. And not only that, but thank you so much for having me here. I love being able to put the word out there.
Great. Well, thanks so much again. This was so fun, Melissa.
Thank you.
Well, I sincerely hope you've enjoyed this conversation. If you haven't already, please go ahead and leave a review on iTunes. Thanks again so much for listening, and we'll see you soon for another episode.